Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we conclude our investigation into the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German, who is the Delphi Killer. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, with my indomitable co-host, Alice.
Brett. Hi, Brett. Sorry, I was so excited I jumped in before you were finished.
It's okay.
I just wanted to say hello back so badly.
Well, Alice is indomitable because she has overcome the difficulties of setting up her podcast equipment that her loving husband bought me for their anniversary. So,
if you remember, this was like literally 2 months ago. And I have finally learned how to put it together. And it was only because Brett took longer than usual to set up, and I had the time to twiddle away, and I figured it out. So we'll see how the sound quality is, because who knows? I may have just totally ruined my sound.
And Alice, you know, you face so many difficulties, and yet you overcome. That's why we love you.
Thanks. Obviously, Brett is making fun of me because I can't figure out Twitter, Tweeter, whatever it is. I can't figure out Reddit, all of the social medias. You would think that I were, I don't know.
I would never make fun of you, Alice. I can't believe you would accuse me of such.
That's somewhat fair.
So I have an interesting thing before we get started to point out about our listeners. You know, we can sort of keep people up to date on what the leading city is for listens to our show. And for a while, it was London and its environs. But after that, it switched over to Atlanta, Georgia. And it's been Atlanta, Georgia for, I don't know, quite some time. But there is a dark horse that is climbing up the ranks for the last 10 episodes by 150%, or I don't know, I'm really terrible at math. For the last 10 episodes, 50% more. How's that? The number one city for our podcast has been Lake Stevens, Washington.
Woohoo! Lake Stevens, Washington. You guys are awesome.
Lake Stevens.
Maybe
so
there's
I looked into Lake Stevens.
Oh. Tell us
It's
more.
only like 30,000 people in Lake Stevens. So I don't know if there's like a book club that listens to us or a podcast club or if we have a fan club in Lake Stevens, Washington or what.
I don't know, but you guys are awesome because 30,000 people, it might be the whole town listening to us.
I mean, Lake Stevens looks like an awesome place. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful Washington city on a lake, as you might expect. But I would like to know. So if anybody out there, well, somebody out there is listening to us from Lake Stevens, shoot us an email. Let us know how things are going in Washington. We'll have to get out there to see you guys sometime. But Atlanta, you better look out.
My story about Washington is it is beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I think they stay so beautiful by forcing people not to have trash. And, power to you. The one time I went there, I couldn't find a trash can anywhere for the entire time I was there for a work meeting. And I was there for 24 hours and I actually carried my trash back on the plane with me because I could not find a trash can throughout my entire stay. No joke.
What part of Washington were you in?
I was in Seattle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was also in work buildings the whole time, but and it was so pristine and the scenery was so beautiful. I couldn't litter. So I had granola bar wrappers because I didn't have time for lunch and I just kind of stuffed them in my pocket. And when I got home, I had pocket full of trash.
Work used to take you to all sorts of interesting places. We had Wyoming. You were in Wyoming.
It's true.
For a work trip. Now Washington. Man.
So who knew that lawyering could bring you all over the country? Maybe the world.
And you have such good stories for our podcast. That was really the best thing you got out of that experience, I think, if I had to guess.
Or podcast anecdotes. I think that's right.
That's very important.
That's why I went to law school.
prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Lake Stevens people. We want to hear about you guys and how you got turned on to this podcast and how you're now our most popular city. So, well, Alice, we have been looking into this Delphi case this is our 4th episode. This is our final episode. However long it takes, we're going to finish it today. So if it's an hour, if it's 2 hours, whatever it is, we're going to go ahead and finish it up and then move on to a new case next week. I hope you guys have enjoyed this discussion. As we've said repeatedly, we think this is a very important case. It's a very important discussion. We hope you guys will keep talking about this case long after this podcast ends. This is one that can be solved, but it's going to be solved because of people like you. So that's why we wanted to focus on this case, and that's why we wanted to spend so much time on it. And I think it was time well spent. But today, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to go through a few more aspects of this case that we think are interesting, and then we're going to talk about suspects, not specific suspects. We're not going to be doing side-by-sides, but we're going to talk about the kind of person we think this is based on the scant evidence that we have. And I think the first thing we can start with, we talked about at the end of the last episode, was this person a serial killer? And whether they were a serial killer or not, there's a very interesting aspect of this case, and it's the scene where this crime was committed.
Why was the scene where it was? So we've talked about this at length. So much about this crime seems like it was well planned by someone who knew these paths, knew the bridge, knew that kids would be out of school this day, and this is one of the few places in town that they may go to. And it just seems like this crime was committed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. We talked about it with the voice, how authoritative and confident it sounded down the hill. And yet, the crime itself seems to take place in the wide open. It's after crossing a river in a place where anyone can see them. There are other parts of the trail and other parts of this private property that are much more secluded. But where the girls were ultimately murdered and found, and law enforcement do believe that they were killed where they were found. It doesn't look like they were dragged there. It's so exposed. So why? Some speculate that as in control as this killer was, he actually didn't choose this specific spot for killing because some speculate that maybe the girls actually ran at some point, and this was where he caught up to them and murdered them. But they were together. And, Brett, if there's two people, and it may seem counterintuitive, but probably the best bet at getting away, even for both of you, is to split up and run, right? Because even that split second where the killer has to decide who to chase could be enough time for you to get away. Now, it's risky because you think strength in numbers. But what's interesting is if the girls gave chase here, they ran together. I don't think that they ran opposite directions and he somehow rounded them up. It doesn't seem likely in terms of how you would chase someone.
And I think there's some tragic heroism here. If you guys have heard Kelsey German, who's Libby's sister, talk about this case, she's talked about how Abby is a hero, and she's a hero because she didn't leave Libby behind. Alice has talked about Libby was close to 200 pounds. It's one of those things where if they had ran in separate directions, or if Abby had just ran faster, maybe she does get away and this person catches Libby and Abby escapes. But it doesn't seem like that was something that Abby was going to do. She wasn't going to leave Libby behind. And let's walk through this. There's a couple things I think that are possible. And I'm reminded once again of Cheryl McCollum, as I often am reminded of Cheryl McCollum, because the episode we did with Cheryl McCollum was like the most amazing hour ever. And I feel like we all learned so much. I wish I could take her class because we all learned so much about this. If you haven't listened to that episode, you need to go and listen to it. It's great. And she's amazing. And she, I think, now has a new podcast. So, check that out too. But in any event, Cheryl talks about how where the killing occurs is so important for telling you about the murderer, because the place where the killer finds the person is not necessarily, in some ways, the killer chose that place because they came to that place. You certainly can see that here. It seems like this killer was very familiar with Delphi, but the girls also showed up there, so maybe you can't see as much. Maybe it was random. Maybe it was just a crime of opportunity. But wherever he took them to murder them, that you would think would tell you a lot, right? And Alice makes a couple points that I think are really interesting. Now, the bodies themselves were found kind of down in a ditch or a culvert or something like that, probably where the person put the bodies to at least hide them for a little while. It is unlikely that they were killed very far away from that. As Alice said, there's no signs that we know of that they were moved. It would have been difficult to move the bodies. It would have been incredibly dangerous to move the bodies very far if you're the murderer, because that's a good way to get caught. This river crossing we talked about, if you guys Google this river crossing, there's all sorts of photos that are taken from the house that's nearby. Like we said, this is private property. This river crossing is wide open. Now, you could look, if you were home and nobody was that day, you could look out your back window and see exactly where these people were crossing the river. And that's led, as Alice said, to, I think, a couple potential theories. I mean, one of them is just for whatever reason, this person wanted to kill the girls where he killed them. That is 100% possible. Maybe this was a place that was special to him for some reason. Maybe this is a place he went when he was a child. Maybe it's a place he just scoped out in one of his prior visits to Delphi, and he knew he was going to have to cross this exposed area, but once he did it, he would get to the place where he wanted to commit this crime.
And Brett, let me cut in there too. One other possibility of him wanting to be there is if he thinks dogs are going to track them, it's hard for dogs to track through the water. So that is a possibility. Now, the reason I don't think that's very strong is he's not going far from there. He's not crossing the river and then going far away, unless he was trying to. My one thought of intentionally crossing the water is potentially to throw off any scent.
That's a good point. And he would have known that people were going to be tracking those girls very quickly, and they certainly would have been using dogs, and they did at some point. So that's not a bad point. That is also a possibility. The other thing, if you look at that map that we put on the website, and you sort of look at this area, there are people who speculate that he was parked at the Delphi Cemetery. The Delphi Cemetery is very close to where the bodies were found. Now, if he was parked at the Delphi Cemetery, that throws off some of those witness statements that we mentioned earlier, the ones that were much more near to the Freedom Bridge, which is much closer to the old CPS building that we talked about last time. That is the area where the police were asking that there was a car there. Apparently, they wanted to know more about that car and know more about the driver of that car. That building is very close to the Freedom Bridge. So if you think he came in at the Freedom Bridge and you think he had a car, that's probably where he parks, right? The Delphi Cemetery is very close to where the bodies are found. And so a couple things could be going on here if he was parked there. The first would be he's leading them in that direction so that he has a quick getaway. This would make sense. You're going to kill some people. You're probably going to, depending on how you kill them, there may be evidence on you. You may want to make a quick getaway. The other possibility is that he was not intending to kill them there. It is possible that if he parked at the cemetery, intended to put them in his car and take them somewhere. That this was actually an abduction, not necessarily a murder. I think it always probably would have ended in murder, but maybe not necessarily here. So that's another possibility. And then there's the possibility that Alice mentioned that the girls ran. And if you think about that possibility, he takes them down the hill. They're now in the forest. Going down the hill itself, speaking to Kelsey about this, would have been difficult. It would have been difficult to get down that hill. You had to then go down another hill. She talks about how when she looked at the hill, there were signs that someone may have slipped. So you can imagine he was taking them down the hill to take them somewhere else. Maybe he slips, they slip, whatever, and they do make a break for it. And you could even imagine, say they do make a break for it. Say he catches up with one of them. Maybe the other one comes back to try and fight him or help her friend. And this sort of ends in murder. Unfortunately, because we don't know anything about how the girls were killed, whether or not there were any defensive wounds, whether or not there was a struggle, it's hard to do much but speculate on this. But I do think people should spend some time just thinking about where these bodies were found and what that says about the situation.
Right, because, up until this point, Brett, we've really talked about how this killer is likely a calculated, confident, studied killer. But if in fact this was not supposed to end in a murder at that point, if it wasn't supposed to end in murder at all, if it wasn't supposed to end in murder at that spot, then what that tells us is this murder is actually less planned and controlled than maybe we think. But again, we don't know unless we know more about the scene. Now, one reason that I do think ultimately murder was on his mind, that he was going to murder them. Now, whether it was there or not, I don't know. But the reason I do think murder was going to happen is because of what we talked about, the signatures that he left behind. So we had speculated that maybe there was staging of the bodies, maybe some posing. Now, if that's true, he staged these bodies. No, we know that's true. He staged these bodies in wide open scenery. Anyone could have seen him doing this, which means that anything he did, those 3 to 4 signatures he left behind, if he staged the bodies, if he tried to cover them up in the culvert, cover them with leaves, this all had to happen incredibly quickly, because no matter how bold he is, he probably is not stupid, and he knew he needed to get back undercover. And, Brett, of course, signatures, depending what they are, don't have to take very much time. But if he's whipping out 3 to 4 signatures, he's probably thought about it before. He's probably done it before. And this goes to your point that he's probably killed before.
I think, given how quickly we think this crime had to happen, given everything we know, it makes me think that something went wrong. And the reason I say that is I've got to think this is something, we talked about this in one of the prior episodes, that this was a big moment for him. This is something he had probably spent a long time thinking about, planning out, looking forward to this day. And There was no reason for him to go as quickly as he did. Even if there was going to be a search, he would have known the search was a few hours away, not a few minutes away. Even if someone's looking for the girls, they're not necessarily going to go down the hill. They're going to spend a lot of time on the trail, which is exactly what happened. So I think he planned on taking a little bit more time committing this murder. But based on everything we think we know, it seems like maybe it was pretty quick and he was already back on the trail heading towards the Freedom Bridge, basically by the time that Derek had gotten there. If that's true, then I think something went wrong. I think something went wrong and he ended up committing this murder more quickly than he thought he was going to. He thought he was going to take more time with this, and either the girls ran or they fought back, and it was one of those things where he killed them and he had to quickly hide them and then get away. That's what I think happened, and I think that's sort of what the scene tells you. We talked to Kelsey about this. It's not like where he actually killed them was out in the open like the river crossing was, but the river crossing was out in the open. And unless Alice is right, and the reason he did this was to throw off the dog's scent later on, which is a possibility, the only other reason I think he would cross the river is if he was parked at the Delphi Cemetery. He had a car. He didn't walk here, right? This is not New York City. This is not Central Park. He didn't walk here. He didn't Uber here. He drove here. That's my view on this. And that means he parked in one of three places. He either parked at the old CPS building, he parked where the girls were dropped off, or he parked in the cemetery. I think one of those three is true. Based on what the police have said, it seems most likely that he parked at the old CPS building. So let's assume that what the police are telling us through their press conference is based in fact, that the two sort of unconfirmed sightings that we've mentioned to you before near the Freedom Bridge are accurate, that the police believe he parked at the CPS building. Why would he cross the river? He doesn't have to cross the river. He could kill them in the foresty area at the bottom of the Monon Bridge, leave the bodies, and then walk back the same way he came. And even if he needed to cross the river for some reason, maybe he doesn't want to go back up to the Monon Bridge, whatever, he didn't have to take them across the river. Crossing the river is probably the most dangerous thing he does for himself. It's the most exposed he's going to be. Everywhere else, he's basically in forest. Now, once again, this is February, so even the forests aren't that thick in February. But when he crosses that river, he's in the wide open. And yet he chose to do that. And we think this was a heavily planned event. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just random, and he's just randomly got away with this, and this is just yet more evidence that he had no idea what he was doing. I think the girls ran. I think that's what happened. I think they ran across the river. He chased them across the river, and he killed them where he found them, and then he headed back to the CPS building where he was parked.
Yeah, Brett, I tend to agree with you. I think the girls ran. And I think this because I think they complied with him when he said down the hill. I think they complied with him walking down the hill, and whatever reason, they were looking for a break, and there wasn't a break while they were still in the trails and there was tree covering. But the first instance that honestly, it was probably Libby, because we know that from Kelsey that Libby was always aware of her surroundings and looking for exit strategies in her everyday life because she wanted to be a detective in law enforcement. I think she saw this opening. She saw how wide open it was. She knew there were houses above. She could probably even see houses from her vantage point. And she saw, we know this from Kelsey, that you can't cross every point in the river. There are only several places that you can cross, that it's shallow enough to cross. And I think maybe they didn't even run when they first saw the clearings. But when she saw that the water was shallow enough for them to run, that's when they ran, because it was their only chance. This was the first time. If they yelled, maybe someone in the houses could hear them. Maybe because of the way the geography was, their voices could bounce and echo kind of in this canyon-like area. Maybe their voices can bounce and be louder than if they were in trees and the trees could muffle their voices. And she knew she had one shot, and she wasn't going to waste it when she was muffled and under the cover of trees. But this was their only shot, in the open, in what appeared to be crossable waters with houses overlooking. And I think they were right. This was probably their best shot.
And remember, what was the first thing the searchers found near the river that alerted them that the girls might be nearby. It was a shoe.
Right? It was Libby's shoe.
One of them had lost their shoes. Yeah. Libby had lost a shoe. And I can just imagine that the reason she lost that shoe was she was running. And I mean, maybe he grabbed her. Maybe, she tripped, whatever.
Maybe she kicked off her shoe so she could run through the water faster.
Maybe.
Whatever it may be. I think more likely is she ran so fast that her shoe flew off, because she would probably have kicked off both shoes at one time if that were the case. But I think you're right. I think they did run. And I think it was a last hurrah and their last chance. And they knew it was their last chance to have any chance of someone hearing them and helping them. Because at that point, I think they knew it was dead or alive. That was it.
Yeah. We talked about this last time. Why not be more aggressive when he's coming across the bridge? And we said, well, at that point, you don't really know. You don't necessarily know that you're not just overreacting. But by the time he's ordered them down the hill, it's time to act. You need to do something. And that's a lot of bravery, because a lot of people, the old saying about going like sheep to the slaughter or whatever. I mean, that's what most people do. Most people just kind of freeze up in situations like that. So if it's true that they did fight or they did try and run away, I mean, that took a lot of heart to even do that. But I think that's kind of what the evidence points to. And the shoe thing, if you think, oh, well, maybe he took off the shoe, or maybe he forced them to take off the shoe, or whatever, for whatever reason he would do that. If he'd done that, the shoe would have been closer to the bodies. The fact that the shoe was sort of a good distance away, to the point that when they found the shoe, they didn't know the bodies, they didn't see the bodies, tells me that it's more like something you said. She was running and the shoe came off.
And Brett, I think this goes again to your theory that the killing had to happen more quickly than the killer had planned. I think that they made such a racket and they were fighting so hard that he knew he couldn't get them back under control and keep walking or take them to where he wanted. You know how when you have, say, a wild animal who's lost it, right? You can't contain them, as opposed to, I don't know if you ride horses, but if a horse hasn't gone wild, they haven't lost their mind, basically, and they've just spooked, you can get them back under control and keep riding. But there are instances where an animal gets so spooked, you have no more control over them. And if it's a horse, you do your best to just jump off of them and minimize damage. I think these girls fought like heck. They fought with everything they had. They screamed at the top of their lungs. They kicked, they scratched, they gouged whatever they could, and he knew there was no chance that he could regain control over them like he had on the bridge. And this was it. This is all he had. He had to end it there.
No, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. I think that's what happened. I don't know, but I think that's what happened. And for those of you who don't know, Alice, in addition to being a all-around amazing person, is also a world-class horsewoman. Horsewoman? Is that the word?
It's equestrian, but close.
Equestrian, whatever.
Sorry, that may have been a totally random example for those of you who don't ride horses, but
that was a
what
perfect
came
example,
to mind.
though. That was a great example. That's such a good example, really. And
again,
yeah.
I just say, when I'm talking about a wild animal, that may come with a negative connotation. That shows immense bravery for these girls, that they fought with such fierceness that I think it was a grown man, knew he could not regain control over them. And I mean, it's so tragic, because I do think that they showed wisdom beyond their years by starting to film so early on and keeping the film on, even if it was hidden. And that was also wise to hide the recording. And also, I think they fought like heck. And, we don't know that for a fact, but looking at where they were killed, I do think they fought.
Yeah, I think when he started off, he was in complete control, and you can hear it in his voice. He was in complete control. And by the time it ended, I think he was in complete panic, because I think the girls were fighting back, and he just lost it. He was completely out of control, and kind of like you said, he didn't know what to do, and he didn't know how to get them back under control, and that's when the murder happened.
Shopify is a platform built for growth, whether you're just starting out or already running a thriving business. From managing inventory to creating a seamless checkout experience, Shopify is designed to handle it all. And it doesn't stop there. Shopify helps you sell everywhere your customers are, online or in person. It's the ultimate tool for turning big dreams into big wins. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP.
So one thing that's interesting about this case and that a lot of people have pointed to, and it goes back to what we talked to about serial killers, is that the FBI has been involved in this case from the very beginning. And in fact, there was an FBI agent who was involved in the initial search. Now, that was just because this person happened to be in town and heard there were some missing girls and wanted to help out. But it is certainly the case that throughout the investigation, the FBI has been an integral part. And some people have wondered if that tells us something about this crime, the fact that the FBI is there. What do you think, Alice? Is that relevant?
I think the real reason is probably just a lot less sexy than people want it to be. There's a general misunderstanding that the FBI only investigate crimes with a federal hook or crimes that are particularly egregious. But here's the thing, that's just not entirely true. It's true that the FBI tends only to lead investigations that are based in federal law, and federal prosecutors can only charge crimes that have a federal hook. But local law enforcement can also request that the FBI assist in virtually any case. And now the FBI can decline to assist depending on their resource needs and the seriousness of the incident and other factors like that, because you can imagine the FBI gets a lot more requests than it can actually assist with. It's not necessarily the case that just because the FBI was involved in this case tells you anything about the case, that it has a federal hook or that the suspect has some, federal ties or international ties. It just doesn't tell you that. All it really tells us is that this was a serious enough of a case that the Indiana State Police needed help. And we know that, this is not the type of crime that Delphi sees, that Indiana sees necessarily. And the amount of resources they needed to even locate the girls to begin with was much bigger than anything they'd faced before. So I'm not surprised that a double murder, a bold double murder like this, and of a case that really just sees the hearts of the country, would be the type of case that the Indiana State Police would reach out to FBI for assistance on, and that the FBI would assist, especially if one of their agents just happened to be in the area and they were helping just as a civilian. You can imagine they go back to their office and make a plea like, guys, this is the type of case we need to help with. The families are grieving. This is so senseless. These are two young girls. I can imagine just the personal plea from that FBI agent.
Yeah, and I think it's a credit to the police, the state police, that they so quickly asked for the FBI's assistance. You hear a lot of times about, local authorities don't want to call in the state authorities because this is their case and by God, they're going to solve it. And then the state authorities don't want to ask for help from the federal authorities because they can do this. This is their job. They don't need any help. And you have those sort of jurisdictional fights all the time. And when you have something like this that's so serious and requires a lot of delicate work and high-tech work and experienced people who've dealt with these things before, like Alice said, Delphi had never seen anything like this. Delphi may never see anything like this again. They don't necessarily see crimes like this in Indianapolis, much less Delphi. So asking for the FBI to come in with their behavioral units and their expertise in serial killers and these kind of crimes was, number one, smart, but number two, also worthy of credit to them just for not being jealous of their own jurisdiction. Giving it up like that, I think, is commendable to them, and I'm glad that the FBI was able to help.
Right. And another thing, we've talked about warrants before, and we've specifically talked about geofence warrants. In this case, the police apparently were able to get a warrant for every cell phone that pinged a tower within 5 miles of the crime scene. And when they got that information, if you want a quick primer on this, remember, they needed to show probable cause to a judge, and a judge had to sign these warrants. When they got the information from the cell phone companies, they contacted each and every one of the people whose cell phones pinged a tower within 5 miles. That's a huge geofence, by the way. They probably got a whole lot more pings than people could actually testify to knowing something about this crime scene. Because they did that, it's very likely that the police have talked to the killer because they talked to everyone whose phone pinged during this time frame in this general area. Or it means the killer didn't bring a cell phone, meaning he wasn't captured on the cell towers, and therefore the police did not know to contact this person. If, in fact, the killer didn't bring a cell phone, it makes you wonder a little bit about what this says about the killer. Kind of like the crime scene, what that tells you about the killer. The absence of carrying a phone, if indeed that's what happened, what that says about the killer. So either he's so sophisticated that he knows geofence warrants are a thing available to law enforcement, or he's on the other end of the spectrum. He's so unsophisticated that he doesn't even have a cell phone. What do you think, Brett?
I think there's one other possibility you and I talked about when we went through this, and I guess that's just that this is a pretty crappy area for cell phone service, so I guess it's possible he did have a cell phone and just didn't ping any towers. I kind of think that's unlikely. So I really do think it's one of these two things, that they've either talked to him or he didn't have a cell phone. I think, this is an interesting question, and there's been some conflicting evidence or discussion out there about this. I have heard several places that this geofence warrant was obtained. I did hear one interview with one of the prosecutors who talked about how difficult it is to get one of these warrants, and it can be difficult. I don't think it would be difficult in this case. I think if you showed up at a judge's chambers with the evidence of this murder and said the person who committed this crime had to have been there during this very narrow time frame, and we just want cell phone pings from this very narrow time frame, he would give it to you. Personally, that's what I think.
Right. And if you could also estimate that you estimate about 20 to 30 people on the trails that day, it's not such a vast number. It's not thousands of people, that it's so narrow. You can imagine it's narrowly tailored enough to appease the judge's worries that the state is just going on a fishing expedition.
And we've talked about this before, judges are very protective of the privacy interests of ordinary citizens. That's what the Fourth Amendment's all about. It's why you have to get a warrant in the first place. So they don't consider themselves just rubber stamp guys who you show up with a warrant and you get it. They don't do that. They can be very difficult to convince. Like I said, I think this case is probably serious enough that they would take that into account. So I think they probably did get this warrant. I think he didn't have a cell phone. That's what I think. I think most killers today most criminals today know that the easiest way to get caught is by taking your cell phone to the crime. Plenty of them still do it, but you also have lots of stories of people who do not take their cell phones for exactly that reason, because they are afraid that they're going to be tracked using their cell phone. So I think the most likely thing here is that he didn't take one. I would like to think he had, and they had talked to him, because that means they are close. They may not even know how close they are, but if they've talked to the suspect, that's a big deal. In that press conference that we talked about last time, they say that they think they've talked to him. Maybe that's based on this. Maybe it's based on something else. But if I had to guess, if I had to bet, I would say he did not take his cell phone with him that day.
And Brett, if he didn't take his cell phone, I think it tells us a couple things. One, we've already talked about this. I think it further convinces me that he knew the area, because he didn't need his phone as a map. He didn't need it as a compass. And these trails were known to him, whether to get there. So maybe he had the phone and left it. No, I don't think he even left it in the car. So he had to know how to get to the trails without his phone.
That's a really good point.
He had to know how to walk along the trails and go among the bridges without a phone, without a GPS, because, even if you don't have cell service, the GPS still works, and you can pull up Google Maps and you can still see where your dot is, right? I've gone hiking before where there's no cell service, but you can still use it as a map, use it as a GPS, use it as a compass to know which way is north. That tells me he knows this area well. Second, and this jumps ahead a little bit, but some people theorize that the girls actually knew him and maybe they had been communicating, whether on social media or text or phone. Now, if in fact this were a planned meeting, he would have his phone on him because he wants to make sure these girls are still communicating with him and he's pretending like he's still meeting up, and he would have a phone with him communicating with them. I don't think that happened. We know, I mean, we don't know because the police haven't told us, but I don't think that happened. And if that were to happen, I think he would have a phone on him because he would keep up appearances until the last minute. And the fact he didn't have his phone on me leads me to believe that they were not in communication with this person. And we've already said this before too. I think they did not know him. They were not planning to meet him here.
No, that's a really good point. I didn't think about that, but you forget that, right? I mean, I can't get anywhere without my cell phone. If I don't have my cell phone, I can't get across the town, much less across the state, because that's how I navigate everywhere. So that's a really good point. If he does not have his cell phone, it means he has to just know where he's going and know how to get there.
One other thing, Brett, I do think he probably has a phone. You know, nowadays, even if it's a flip phone, I think people have phones, which means his phone was far enough away to not be within a 5-mile radius, because otherwise it would be caught within the geofence warrant. Where would you leave your phone? Probably where you live.
Okay, so suspects. We're not going to talk about them. We've said that before. We're just not going to get into it. There are suspects in this case. You can read all about them. None of them have panned out, and several of them look like the sketches, and they just haven't worked out. So, seems like most of the publicly discussed suspects have been debunked.
And guys, don't do side-by-sides. It ruins people's lives. It's not helpful to law enforcement because you know what you don't want the suspect to know about is that the police are closing in on them. So don't do side-by-sides. Leave that up to the police. If you have an actual tip, call it in. Don't just circulate side-by-side comparison photos of who you randomly think looks like the sketch.
The side-by-side thing is so stupid for several reasons. The first one is there's one killer. So that means every other side-by-side is wrong. So every other side-by-side is you accusing someone of being the murderer of these two young girls who didn't do it. That's the first thing. The second thing, if this killer is sophisticated at all, there was a story not a couple weeks ago about, it was on Twitter, a murderer who had killed a girl back in the 80s. They just discovered who it was, and he would become a patron of every podcast that discussed the murder. So these podcasters were all finding this guy's picture and his podcast or his Patreon support for their website after he was arrested for this murder, which is freaky to the extreme. But it also just goes to show that in the modern day, these guys are paying attention. If you're on Reddit or on Facebook and you happen to connect and you throw up the side-by-side and it's the guy and he sees that, what's he going to do? He's going to take steps to destroy any evidence there already is. If he thinks the police are onto him, that's only going to make him more careful. If you think you have a tip, like Alice said, don't put it on Facebook. Nobody cares what people on Facebook think anyway. Nobody cares what people on Reddit think. It's not going to solve the case. Putting it on Reddit. Send it into the tip line. We've given you the number before. We'll give it to you again now, and we'll talk about it at the end of the show too. But the number is 844-459-5786. You can call that number with any tip you got, and I encourage you to do that, no matter how minor the tip may be. Go ahead and share it. Their job at the tip line is to take a look at those tips and work through them, and they've worked through a lot. So don't be shy about doing that. But don't do the stuff on Facebook and Reddit. It makes the police not want to engage with those of us in the true crime community who are trying to figure this out. It's another reason they don't give us information. We've seen that in the Maura Murray case so many times. Right now, even as we record this, there's a lawsuit going on, a FOIA lawsuit in the Maura Murray case, and the state, in its response about why it doesn't want to release any more evidence, pointed to all of the sort of craziness that goes on in social media and people sending false tips and faking tips and just all this crazy stuff that happens in the Marbury case. They point to that as a reason not to release more evidence because it'll just create even more of a frenzy. We don't want that here. That is the worst possible thing. If the police aren't telling us, like Alice said last time, the make and model of that car, because they're worried that somebody's going to start doing side-by-sides with everybody who drives, a white Dodge Durango or whatever. I mean, that is so detrimental to the case. So, and it's hard for all of us. We all mess this up sometimes. We can all get too aggressive on this stuff, but we have to be good citizens when we're talking about this, or it really is going to hurt the case. And that's the last thing any of us want.
Right. And, this leads into the next part, which we're not going to harp on too much because you've already heard us talk about it. And I don't want to, criticize the police in this case too much because I do think they have done a very good job. But the question is, how much holdback evidence do the prosecutors need? And the answer is pretty simple. You need enough evidence that if you find the guy, he'll be able to be convicted, right?
Right.
And so you don't need to hold back everything. You probably don't need to hold back 4 signatures. You probably only need to hold back 1. Now, if what the police have hinted at is true, they have plenty of evidence. We heard the former prosecutor say there's a lot of physical evidence. It's not what you think. We hear that there are signatures.
We know they've asked people for DNA samples to eliminate them as suspects.
Which means they probably have DNA. And so they just need to know who did this. And there's lots of ways to know who did this. You don't need to be confirmed 99 ways. You need to be confirmed probably 1 or 2 ways to confirm that this is your killer. Does it behoove them to hold back more information than they need? I don't think so, because we are several years out now. And this is what we know about working cases that are seemingly cold. You need to get as much info out there as quickly as possible because, witnesses die, memories fade, people forget things that happened a week ago. We have witnesses tell us this all the time. I can't remember what I had for lunch. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, Brett, I'd be a rich woman. But, I'm sure that the police have thought through it, but it's not clear to us why they waited until April 2019 to release the video. They released the still, but not the video. And why they waited that long to release the guy's part of the audio. Why not release it earlier? I think the plea here is if there's other evidence that they can release, I think they need to do it now. There are still a lot of people very invested and interested in this case, and people's memories are still somewhat sharp. It hasn't been a decade yet, but that will soon change. So I think if there's more evidence to be released, now is the time to do it. You shouldn't be waiting for the 5-year reunion.
Right. I think you're exactly right, Alice. And this is 2017. We investigate cases where things happened in 2017, and we ask people about that, and they're like, wow, that was so long ago. We hear that all the time. It's only 3 years, but for a lot of people, that was a lot of baseball games and birthday parties and stressful days at work and everything else that happens in life that makes you forget about what was going on then. So if for nothing else, the longer this takes, the harder it's going to be to solve it. It's not rocket science to say that, but it's true. And the police have been so close hold on this case. We don't even know how the girls were killed. And people may think it's voyeuristic to want to know. It's not. It is not voyeuristic. If those girls were stabbed to death, we need to know what kind of knife was used. That in of itself could narrow this down. Not that many people carry knives these days. Not as many as when I was growing up, everybody had a knife. Not as many do now. Let's say they were stabbed to death. Was it a kitchen knife? Was it a Bowie knife? Was it a serrated knife?
A hunting knife?
Was it a pocket knife? Was it a hunting knife? What kind of knife was it? Because here's the thing. If it was a kitchen knife, and a kitchen knife just disappeared from the home of some family somewhere, the person might have noticed that at the time and thought it was really weird, but never connected it to anything. And then all of a sudden that part comes out and maybe they make the connection. And maybe there were other things like dominoes, things just start to fall in their minds. If it was some other kind of knife and, the hunting buddies wonder, where'd your good hunting knife go? Oh, well, I lost it. There's all sorts of things that could trigger something in somebody's mind. The signatures could be one of them. We came up with all sort of ridiculous signatures last time. Alice went on the Blair Witch Project thing. Maybe it's a bunch of sticks tied together. Maybe it was. Maybe the person who did it really likes the Blair Witch Project. And if you knew that's what they did, somebody who knows a guy who's really weird and really likes the Blair Witch Project and has been very strange ever since these murders happened would put two and two together. I get holding back evidence, and I understand holding back evidence at the beginning of this case, but we are late in the day at this point. And unless we want this to become a truly cold case, I think the police need to seriously reevaluate what they've released and whether they can release anything else.
Right. And we recognize we're speaking from a point of not knowing any inside information on this case, so we don't know why they've made the decisions. But, we make these decisions all the time when we prosecute cases. And from our perspective at this point, you don't have a case to prosecute if you don't have a target or a suspect, right, Brett? And
right.
You're only going to get there.
End of the day.
Yeah, you need a person.
And this case is so much that I believe that if the police ever have a suspect, a real suspect, they will solve this case. If they can ever figure out who they think did it, they will be able to tie that person to the case for all sorts of reasons. But they have to locate the person first. And that's why I just think, unlike even most cases, this one, they need to release some of this evidence. And I'm not being critical at all. I just want them to reconsider the steps they've taken up to this point.
So with that, Brett, do you think, kind of like what the police said at the press conference, do you think that the police have spoken to the killer?
They have spoken to so many people. I think that's possible. And I think it's definitely possible if the most likely scenario is true. If this is a local person, if it's someone from either Delphi or the surrounding area, I think they probably have talked to him, because I think they probably talked to them for some reason. It's just, if it's a local person, then the amount of time, effort, energy, and resources they put into this, they probably spoke to them. How in depth was that discussion? I don't know. Was it because of the cell phone search? Maybe. Was it just because of sort of routine talking to people? Could be. So I do think they've talked to this person, but I don't think they've necessarily talked to them in a serious way, you are a suspect / person of interest way. I don't think they've talked to him like that. I think if they had talked to him like that, they would have solved it. If it was somebody that they have identified, if it was any of the suspects you've heard discussed, they would have solved it. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's likely. I do think it's local, and because of that, I think they've talked to him. But I don't think that he has made it to the list of even potential suspects.
So having said all that, let's talk about who we think might have done this. What kind of person might have done this? And I think the place you always have to start in cases, well, really any murder case, is someone the victim, or in this case, victims, know. Everybody knows that. Someone's murdered 8 times out of 10. It's going to be somebody they know. Stranger murders are pretty rare. Stranger murders of children are incredibly rare. So let's talk about that. John Douglas, who is a famous FBI profiler and the man who wrote Mindhunter, some of you have seen that show on Netflix, has suggested that the girls knew the killer. One of the things he said made him think that is actually the use of the term guys at the beginning of the Down the Hill comment, which he described as a familiar term, the kind of term you would use with somebody you know. We talked about this earlier. To me, I call everybody guys. It's just one of the words I use. So I don't necessarily think that because he called them guys, that means that he knew them. But there are a couple other things that might make you think he knew the girls. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is rumor. Struggled with whether or not to talk about this at all. But I think, given this case and given our desire for this case to be solved, it's worth going through this. Just know that these text messages have never been confirmed. We talked to Kelsey. I asked Kelsey about these text messages we're about to describe. She thinks they were sent. She doesn't think they're, fabricated. She wonders whether the person who sent them actually knows what they're talking about. We know that the girls were found by at least some people who knew the girls. There have been people who have said that, I believe, a step-uncle or an uncle by marriage was one of the people who was in the party who found the girls. His name is David Erskine. There are some screenshots of text messages that are reported to be from him describing what he saw that day. And we talked about this earlier. It's surprising that this hasn't leaked. And that's one reason I think there's a not insignificant chance that these text messages are accurate. There's a couple things that I don't think are accurate, but we'll just go through them. We talked about the fact that we don't know how they were killed. These text messages describe that. We talked about signatures. There's some weird stuff in these text messages. So here's what they say. Abby was placed there on the ground like a doll, hood up, hands folded, wearing the same clothes as the pic from the bridge. We talked about this. One of the things that's a possibility here is that the bodies were posed. That would definitely be posing. Libby was nude. Libby's top half was covered with leaves and sticks, almost like they were trying to cover her. There was no rape. Okay. Going back to whether or not this is somebody that knew the victims, one of the things that is common when someone murders someone they know is they try and cover up the body. It's just a weird psychological thing people do. If you find a body covered by a blanket, a lot of times that indicates it's somebody the person knew. It's a weird thing. You murder somebody and then you want to make them comfortable or something.
It's almost like taking care of them in a strange way.
Right. It's a totally weird thing. It is possible that the only reason he had covered her up is to hide the body. Can't say, but it's just an interesting note. I don't know why she was nude, but I read the coroner's report. Now that part of everything is the thing that makes me wonder if these are accurate, because I don't think this person would have been able to read the coroner's report. But he does say the only DNA would be from Libby's fingernails. She fought like hell, which I do believe that she fought. Says they knew what they were doing with Abby. It cuts off that part, so it's hard to see the entirety of the text message. It was personal with Libby. Libby's head was an inch away from being taken off completely. Abby was stabbed in the heart and artery in her neck. Coroner's report stated everything was over by 3:30. No rape. So going back to it was personal with Libby. We talked about this earlier. The thing about these text messages, they may be fake, they may be true. They fit with everything else we've heard. With sort of the vague statements that were made by the police. This notion of this was a terrible scene and it was something you never want to see, and how it stuck with them. This thing with Libby sounds like overkill. This is not somebody just stabbing someone to death. It's a vicious attack. Now, a couple things could have happened there. Maybe it was personal, as this person speculates, or maybe Libby did fight and fought like hell. And maybe she frustrated whatever this guy was trying to do. He had this plan, and these girls, they're not complying. They're fighting back. And so he attacks her with particular vengeance.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Libby fighting like hell is consistent with what Kelsey told us about Libby's personality, right? And it would also go with the story of them. Maybe she was the one who instigated the running, if in fact they were running from the murderer. And you can imagine if she is screaming her head off, trying to gain attention and running across, forcing him to go into the open by running across the river. How angry he may be at her. Now, just because this person, again, we don't know if this is a real text message, if this person knew what they were talking about. Just because they use the phrase, it's personal, I don't necessarily think that points to the killer being someone known to the girls.
Yeah, I mean, that's pure speculation on their part. I think what you said is true. I mean, that's if one of the girls was killed more viciously than the other, I think it is probably exactly that they were fighting back, and this was, he got really mad. I think that is probably the most likely thing.
Sorry, Brett, it makes sense that he would be so mad because of what you said. He'd been dreaming of this. He was going to savor this killing. And because of the girls fighting back, maybe because Libby fought back particularly hard, he was getting robbed of his euphoric moment. And you can imagine the anger. He has been dreaming of this, and now it's going completely off the rails because of them fighting back. For someone to be in such control on the bridge with that steady voice down the hill to someone kind of losing it and going to overkill mode, I can imagine it's because everything he had planned was just torn up.
If the girls knew the killer in today's day and age and knew them, in a way where they were communicating with them, you would think the police would know who this person was by this point. Now, there are some people who speculated, we talked about this earlier in this episode, that the girls could have been groomed. They could have been lured to this spot. This could have been someone they were talking to online, possibly through some, chat roulette, those types of anonymous chat rooms. We know that, Abby didn't have a phone. Libby would let her use her computer sometimes, which she wasn't supposed to be able to do, but, girls are going to be girls. They're going to do that kind of thing. One thing that is interesting, Libby had wiped her phone about 10 days before the murder. The reason given for that is that her phone was kind of wonky. It wasn't functioning properly. And that was the way to kind of get it back to working. But if you think the girls were groomed, you could imagine whoever it was saying, hey, we need to make sure your parents don't find out about us. Wipe your phone. And in reality, they are covering their tracks. And they said, wipe your phone and we'll be together on your snow day. Meet me at the Monon High Bridge, right? I mean, you could imagine something like that happening. And maybe that's why the girls were filming the person. That's another possibility, is that the filming of the person wasn't out of fear, but because this was the guy coming to meet them. And they were filming him sort of on his approach or whatever. But if that were true, you would think there would be more on the video where the girls were talking about that fact, that they knew who this person was, or excitement that he's showing up, and that kind of stuff, like girl talk at the beginning. And it doesn't seem like that's the case. I've got to think the police would tell us if that were true.
Right. And, this is a couple episodes back, but I had mentioned that the fact that they were filming him, and from people who've watched the video describing that there was uneasiness in their faces, right? They were not giddy. They were not excited. There was some apprehension that led them to film him, leads me to believe that they didn't know him. Because again, if you think someone's being weird and you know who it is, just mention it to your sister or your parents afterwards. Hey, I saw Mr. Joe on the bridge and he was acting weird. You don't need to film him.
It's I don't think they knew him. I don't think they they were groomed to be there.
Here's the thing on the grooming, Brett. I think it's entirely possible that Libby and or Abby were chatting with guys on apps or online or what have you, whether it is romantic or otherwise. And And I say that because I was a young teenage girl before too. You kind of do things that are stupid. I definitely chatted with guys, and now I think back, I'm like, that was really dumb. I shouldn't have done that. Now, they could have been doing that, and that could have been completely unrelated and separate from what happened here. So I'm not saying to discount it, but I think it's totally within the realm of possibility that they were chatting with guys. They're young girls, and they're kind of starting to enter the world of dating. And I don't know how much experience they had in terms of dating or, kissing guys or holding hands. I don't know those things, but they absolutely are at the age where their classmates and their cohorts are going on dates. They are chatting with guys online they may not know. They're probably fantasizing about, their first kiss or who they're going to go to prom with when they get older. Even if they were doing that, and there's evidence of that on the phones or on the iPad, I don't think it's necessarily related to this event. I don't think that that they knew this guy. I don't think they were going to meet this guy for all the reasons that we said before. And I just note that because I think some people, if they find out that the girls were chatting with some guys on some app, that's what it is. They were definitely being groomed. I based on the scant evidence we have, in this case, I just don't think that they planned to be there with this guy.
And it seemed like going to the bridge that day, even if it wasn't completely random, and even if the girls had planned on doing it, they hadn't planned very well. Because they didn't ask until that day, and initially, Kelsey turned them down. And
they didn't seem particularly upset, right? It wasn't like Libby threw a fit and was like, I'm so upset, you've ruined my life. Something like that. You can imagine if someone was throwing a wrench in your well laid out plans.
Exactly. And there's no indication, and I've got to think if this happened, we would know about it, and we'd probably know who did this, that there was any communication within those few days with this person saying, or even that day saying, okay, we have a ride, we're leaving now, can't wait to meet you. I mean, there's nothing like that, And
you said, the phone was wiped. I don't know why her phone was wiped 10 days before, but one thing I know about dating or chatting with someone who you like, if you don't chat with them for 10 days, you think they've lost interest. You think it's over. Even if you think you're so in love, and let's say you're actually dating someone and you didn't hear from them for 10 days, I'm not going to go out of my way to go meet you where we said we were going to meet because I am angry at you, or I think you've forgotten about me, or I think we're broken up.
Yeah, I think if this went down this way, the way it would go is the guy would say, hey, like 10 days before, I don't want your parents to know about us. They'll never understand. Wipe your phone, number one. Number two, download some sort of encrypted communication thing, like a Signal type thing, and we'll talk on that. And we don't know if she had anything like that on her phone. And I don't know how easily the police can actually recover that kind of stuff, the encrypted stuff. Maybe something like that happened. I guess that's possible, but it is pure speculation to say that it did. There's certainly not any evidence, really, that they knew the killer.
And I don't, I'm not a technology forensic specialist, but there are some deleted files. There are a lot of deleted files, actually, that law enforcement can recover. And a lot of people don't know that because, a lot of times we'll see that people try to delete things right before they think they're going to get caught. And a lot of it can actually be recovered. Now, I don't know what happens if you do like a hard reset on your phone and it wipes everything. That might not be recoverable, but there are instances where deleted files can be recovered. And I don't know if that happened here. And now we've talked a lot about this, and I think Brett and I are in agreement, but I think this killer is local. The killer almost certainly knew this area. They'd almost certainly been there before. They knew this bridge ended in a dead end, and they knew there would be nowhere for the girls to go once they reached the end of the bridge. He knew that if he could take them down the hill, it would be secluded. And it's almost impossible to believe that someone who is just passing through town would be able to have the kind of command of the area that this killer had. And, we've already mentioned this before. We know that killers, particularly serial killers, hunt in areas they're comfortable with, which I think goes again to the fact that I think this person is local.
And Kelsey thinks they're local. And I put a lot of stock in that because when I look at the guy, one of the first things that I thought, I know one of the first things you thought was, does this look like somebody from the area? And that may seem like a silly thing to ask, but it's Delphi, Indiana. I grew up in a little town in the middle of nowhere. People from a little town in the middle of nowhere dress differently than folks in the big city, it's not just a stereotype. It's true. And Kelsey said, this person looks like every other, 18 to 40-year-old man in Delphi, that it could literally be anybody walking down the street. And a couple things about him. And, you guys can call us stereotypers if you want to, but we're going to do that. I think you look at this person and what we have here, I don't think this is a super sophisticated person. I think this is most likely somebody who is maybe a farmer is one possibility. The way they're dressed is just, they're not styling,
It's probably someone who's, right, it's a laborer, I think, and Kelsey agrees. She said that Delphi is surrounded by farms, it's a farming community, and this is the type of outfit that people would wear not only when they're working on the farm, but to go to school, to go to the store, to go to church. This is just kind of the uniform that people wear, both young and old, because my first thought in looking at the picture is that looks more like something my dad would wear than, say, a high schooler would wear. But Kelsey said, no, this is, she knows people who went to her high school who would wear something like that.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily, at first I thought age was a differential here. I thought this is an older person because someone in high school wouldn't dress like this. Kelsey put the kibosh on that and said, no, someone in high school would dress like this. But I do think there's a class element to this. Alice, I don't know, whenever I go out on a trail or go hiking, I always see people who are dressed, look like they, just walked out of the Saks Fifth Avenue hiking section. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they look like they're ready for the runway as they're hiking. And that's not this. This is not, I don't think this guy's a lawyer or a doctor who decided to go down to the trails that day. I think it probably is somebody middle class, blue collar, lower middle class, that kind of area, a working person. Some people have suggested they could work at a slaughterhouse nearby. The blue jacket is apparently similar to what people at the slaughterhouse would wear. When this person is found, I think it is likely that they have a criminal record of some sort. I don't think double murder of children is the first thing you do. A lot of you have heard of the triad for serial killers, that most serial killers tortured animals, wet the bed, and lit fires. Why those three things go together, I don't know. But the torturing of animals in particular, you don't just start out stabbing a child to death. The thought of doing something like that is just so overwhelmingly horrible that I don't think someone for their first criminal endeavor does it. I think they had to have worked up to that. Doesn't necessarily mean they're like a sex offender, which people immediately go to that. But I think when this person is found and you look through their history, you're going to see similar acts of violence or that kind of disregard for other people, disregard for animals, cruelty, all of that. I think you're going to see that kind of stuff. It's another reason that not knocking farmers, love farmers. Farmers are the salt of the earth, but a lot of farmers have a lot more personal experience killing things than your average person.
Right. I've worked on a farm before, and there gets to be a point when it's the season to kill your chickens. You go through defeathering and, killing dozens of chickens in a day. It becomes a process. And, I'm not a particularly lover of blood. We've already talked about this in our past episodes. I'm actually a pretty big weenie when it comes to gory things, but you kind of get numb to the killing of chickens when it's time to kill chickens because it's just what you have to do. And so I think what you're saying, has a lot of sense. It's not a knock on farmers, but rather someone who may be used to ending life.
Right. Yeah. I think you're gonna see something like that. And look, this is where the picture is valuable. We've talked about how we can't really tell anything, but you can tell some things. Serial killers, murderers, they don't know class. They don't know wealth. It doesn't matter. It's not like only rich people are psychopaths or only poor people are psychopaths. I mean, it's not like that. Not anybody, but these types of killers can come from any socio-demographic area, and that's one reason it makes it difficult when you have this sort of stranger murder to figure out who did it, because the suspect pool is basically limitless. But I think when you look at the photo, you can slice off at least a segment of society when you're thinking about who this is. And I think the other thing about it is we've talked about this, the command in the voice and how this person addresses the girls. He's not being smooth. He's not being suave. He's not trying to ingratiate himself to them. He's not trying to make them feel comfortable. He is commanding them. And I think the farmer has total control over his farm. You sort of think of it that way, going back to the idea that it could be a teacher or a coach or someone who is used to telling children what to do. I think that's another possibility. To me, those are the two big categories of people that I think the suspect is most likely to come from. Police officer is a possibility. Not saying the police did it at all, but police are used to commanding people to do things. The Golden State Killer is a rare case of, a serial killer who was a police officer. But if you know anything about the Golden State Killer, he was similar to this guy in some ways. He dominated the scenario whenever he would put himself in it. He would often command, a lot of times he would break into a house. There'd be a man and a woman. He would command the man to basically don't move. He would stack dishes on them and say, if I hear the dishes move, I'm going to kill you and kill your wife too. And then he would, rape the wife, murder them both, whatever he did. But he had sort of a similar psychological aspect to this person. Former military is also another possibility. Just someone who's used to command, someone who's used to telling someone to do something and having no doubt that they will comply. You hear that in the voice, and I think you will see that in the person if they're ever caught. One other possibility I just want to throw out there, we talked about this a little bit, is the possibility of two killers. I think that is unlikely. You don't see it a lot. As we've said before, one person can keep a secret, two people can keep it if one of them's dead. Hard to believe that these two people, if they were working in concert, would have kept this secret, particularly since one of them probably killed both the girls. You can imagine two killers, two girls, going to kidnap the girls and do whatever. You do have the two sketches that don't seem to look anything alike. One appears to be a younger person. One appears to be an older person. The police don't think that. The police think there's one person. They think the sketches are essentially just a different way of looking at different people. I think what they think is that, and I don't know about this, Alice. I mean, the way I look at people has changed as I've gotten older. So the whole idea that younger people see people who aren't that much older than them as being much older than them, whereas older people look at everybody and they don't look old to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's relative to your age, basically.
Exactly. That the way you look at people and the way you imagine the way they look is dependent on your age, and that's what these sketches are all about, is they're different. So different because they come from different people. I guess that's possible. I personally don't buy into the two killer theory. I just don't think two killers could have gotten away with this without leaving some evidence that there were two people there.
Right. I don't think there were two killers because the video we have shows one person, and I don't think that if they were going to work in concert, one would follow so long, so far behind. And you know what? Here's a point about hold back evidence. If the police think there are two people, they should come out and say it so that people are looking for two people. Because if you have two people who are close enough to do something like this, they probably still hang out. They're probably shady together. They might be related. They may live together. It would be a lot more useful for people who are looking for suspects. So I don't think this is the type of holdback evidence the police would hold. And if they really thought there were two people, they would have said it. And they have pretty much repeatedly said that they think it's one person. And I tend to agree. So, Brett, will this case ever be solved?
I think it will be solved. And it will be solved because somebody who knows something is going to step up and they're going to say something. That's how this is going to be solved. I'll never believe that there's not someone out there who knows something about this case. And you owe it to those two girls, if you know something, to say it, even if you think it's the dumbest thing in the world and it's probably not true, and you've spent the last 3 years telling yourself every day that this little voice in the back of your head is stupid, and how could you ever think that, and that can't be true. If that has been happening to you, you need to call the tip line and leave a tip. The number, once again, 844-459-5786. If you do not feel comfortable leaving a tip, and for some reason feel comfortable talking to us or talking to the people on the Down the Hill podcast or Scene of the Crime or True Crime Garage or Generation Y or any of the people who've covered this case, reach out to them. Reach out to us, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Somebody knows something. We said from the very beginning of this case we weren't going to solve it. And after talking about this case for 4 episodes, it's a little anticlimactic to be essentially where we were when we begun. But that's just how it's going to be until one of two things happens. Either the police release more evidence, in which case we'll do another show, or somebody who knows something steps up. And you will never convince me that person isn't out there.
Well, Brett, this has been a long journey, but I think a really worthy one. And I do hope that, people keep talking about this case, because I do think it's recent enough that memories can still be fresh and somebody does know something.
Yeah. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you don't mind how much time we've put into this case. And I hope it was worthwhile in some way. This family deserves answers, and I do think they will get them eventually. There are a lot of great podcasts on this. I mentioned a few earlier, but if you are still interested in this case, you want to hear more, Scene of the Crime is really good. Does a really good job of sort of digging into the evidence without a lot of extra. If you want extra, Down the Hill has that. It's much more sort of storytelling along with what happened, if that makes sense. It can be frustrating at times because you kind of just want them to get to the case, and it takes them a while sometimes to do that, but it's really well done and worth listening to. The guys over at True Crime Garage, who are the best out there in the true crime world, have done several shows on this. I know Nick this is a big case for him and one he really wants to solve, and so they've done some really good work on this too, so you should listen to that. A lot of podcasts out there have covered this case. This is the case that I think unites everybody. This is the one everybody wants solved. And we can just hope that one day we're going to get there. I mean, you can spend the rest of your life on this case if you want to, but there's a ton of stuff out there, lots of articles. We've linked to a bunch of those on our website. Also, huge amount of information on Reddit. I'll tell you, when we started doing this case, there were actually people who warned us to stay away from Reddit. I think because there are a lot of rumors, a lot of unconfirmed reports on there, but there's also a lot of information. The map we've referenced several times is from Reddit, as is the timeline. And I'll just tell you, it might have seemed like we spent a lot of time on that timeline. We did spend, 2 whole episodes on it, but the timeline itself is incredibly detailed. You can learn a lot from that. Spend a lot of time with it if you want to. Both that map and the timeline were created by Just Wondering If. So shout out to that person. Also, We have linked to both of those on the website, so if you want to check that out, you can head over to prosecutorspodcast.com. We probably messed some things up. We always do. And like always, we want you guys to point out to us if we did. So as I said before, prosecutorspod@gmail.com is our email address, @prosecutorspod for Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We're also on YouTube. Seeing more and more of you guys on YouTube. Thanks for all your comments and views. Always enjoy interacting with you guys. We're also on Reddit. We have our Patreon page. Thank you to all you folks on Patreon who really pushed us to do this show. I'm really glad we did, even if we were a little hesitant to do it in the beginning, and just keep recommending good stuff and we will keep covering it. But I think that's all we have on Delphi for now. I look forward to the day we get to record the follow-up episode and talk about the arrest of the person who committed this crime. And that day will come. I am confident that it will. I have a lot of faith. And I know the police are working really hard. Word on the street is that they've been working really hard lately. So this case is not cold. It's still hot. And we can still hope that it will be solved soon. But we will be back next week. We'll have a whole new case for you guys to listen to, new questions, and hopefully new answers. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
I had fun talking about it, but it's also like the 1 million people on, not really, 47 people on Twitter. That wasn't even on purpose.
You are funny.
I'm something. Thanks for recognizing.
Okay.
My goodness, I'm so proud of my setup.
I'm so proud of you too, Alice. I'm very proud of you.
I'm very proud of you.
You're really coming into your own as a co-host. If it's called a spit guard.
I thought you said it was a spit guard. I thought you called it that.
Maybe I did. That's hard to say these days. Plosive.
Spit guard.